Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today I'm going to be doing a Sky Striker deck profile. So I'm kind of excited to do this one because this deck has been in the meta for a long time, and it's a super fun deck to be able to play around with that plays practically just spells in the main deck with a couple of traps and just the very few monsters that I actually play in this build. So I'm really excited to show you guys this deck, and before we get into this, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell on there so you can become part of the notification squad, and let's get straight on this. So this deck is kind of like Burning Abyss. You can kind of hit it any way you want to hit it, and it still is meta. Like, there is literally 4 cards that are limited to 1 in this deck, and it's just crazy that this deck is still surviving. So let's get straight on to this. So first off, we're just going to be playing 3 copies of Sky Striker Ace Ray. She is actually the only monster that we play in the entire deck. I just play her as a 3-of because that's really all you need is 3 copies of Ray. Basically, you just use her as a material to link summon any of your link monsters, your Sky Striker Aces that are in the extra deck. You use her to link summon into those, which is kind of interesting. And this deck, it continues to get support because we're getting a Link 2 for this deck, which is going to be interesting. And I don't know how the deck is going to play after that, but it's going to be kind of cool. So that's it for the monsters, guys. I know that's pretty slim, but we don't really need anything else besides the Sky Striker Ace Ray. So let's get into the spells, because this deck really focuses around the spells. So for the generic spells, we're going to be playing 1 copy of Reinforcements of the Army, which is going to search our Sky Striker Ace Ray because she is a warrior monster. So it's like we're playing 4 copies of her instead of 3. I'm not playing any hand traps in here, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. We're playing a single copy of Upstart Goblin because you want to get 3 spells in the graveyard as quickly as possible because of the different abilities of your Sky Striker maneuvers and your Sky Striker spell cards that are going to be able to get you different pluses for having multiple spells in the grave. Metal Foes Fusion we play as a 1-of for the Foolish Burial Goods. A single copy of Terraforming to search our Sky Striker Mobilize. It's Sky Striker, it's the field spell, Sky Striker Airspace Area 0. You use this to basically get your extra copy of Area 0 into your hand. We play 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods to send the Metal Foes Fusion to the graveyard so we can get that extra draw. Really good combo is to be able to like start and activate 1 copy of Foolish Burial Goods and then send the Metal Foes Fusion to the graveyard, and then you shuffle it into the deck and then draw a card, which is pretty cool to be able to do, to be able to get that extra draw out of the deck. And then we play 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone because we just don't want to deal with back row. You just want to banish it. Usually you just want to get rid of it. Like, this is one of the meta decks that I actually play. I really love Sky Strikers. It's really interesting, but it's kind of like, what more is it going to take to hit this deck for it to finally not be tier 1? Because it's taking up like 25% of all topping right now. That and Orcust. And Orcust and this deck are going to get hit on the next list. I would not be surprised if they put Mobilize Engage to 1. Like, I think that's the only way that you're ever going to cripple this deck, is to put that at 1. Then, for the last generic spell card that we're playing in here, it is going to be 3 copies of Card of Demise. Yes, I do play the Demise variant of this deck, because the reason I play the Demise variant of this deck is because you play so many spells and so few monsters, and that's really where Demise thrives. It just works for me to play Demise in the deck, and you basically normal summon your Ray, get your Kangari on the field, and after that, a turn or 2 later, you're going to want to activate the Card of Demise to get some more pluses and to dig deeper in the deck, because once you get a Kangari on the field or Shizuku on the field, you're fine with just having a Kangari or a Shizuku on the field. Usually ending with Shizuku is what you want to go for, so you can reduce your opponent's monster's attack points. So the Card of Demise turn 3, because I usually want to go first. Turn 3, usually by the time you put the Card of Demise into play, it's not that big of a deal to not special summon that turn. So that's it for the generic spells, guys. Let's get into the Sky Striker spells. So the really cool thing about this deck, just quickly mentioning, is this deck is basically all about the grind game. Being able to use your Sky Striker spells and traps multiple times, or your Sky Striker spells multiple times because you have multi-roll, is just really cool. So then we play a single copy of Widow Anchor, because Widow Anchor did go to 1 recently on the last list. If you control no monsters in your main monster zone, you can target a monster opponent's side of the field and negate that face-up target's effect. And then it has a 3 spells in the graveyard effect that lets you take control of the monster as well as negate the effect. We play a single copy of Multi-Roll. Multi-Roll is at 1 as well. The only reason we play multi-role at 1 is because it is at 1, but basically it has the ability that once per turn you can target one other card you control, send that card to the graveyard, and also your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to that spell or trap effect, or in activation of that spell effect. And then it also has the ability that during the end phase, you can set Sky Striker spells and traps with different names from your graveyard up to the number of Sky Striker spell cards you activated this turn. So like if I activate 4 Sky Striker spells, I can just pick 4 up from the grave and set them back on the field to reuse them, but you have to banish them when they leave the field. So basically you get 2 uses out of your Widow Anchors. You get 6 copies of Engage, you get 2 Hornet Drones, and that's not only that, but it's also like Kangari and Shizuku getting them as well. So you have multiple uses, and that's why it's not that big of a deal, both of these being at 1. We also have our other at 1 spell card, which is Hornet Drones. Hornet Drones just puts us a card on the field to give us a Kangari. It's a searchable, basically, 1-of that you just activate to get your Kangari on the field to start your combos. Really good card to be able to play in the deck as a 1-of. Just an overall good card. It just puts a token on the field. We play a single copy of Jamming Wave. Jamming Wave lets us target 1 set spell or trap card in the field and destroy it. And if you have 3 or more spell and traps in your graveyard, you can destroy a monster on the field as well. Eagle Booster protects our Sky Strikers because if you control no monsters, you can target 1 face-up monster on the field, and it's unaffected by card effects until the end phase of the turn. And then if you have 3 or more Striker spell or 3 or more spells in your graveyard, it can't be destroyed by battle either. So it really protects our monsters like completely, and that's really what this deck is about. We play a single Hercules base. Hercules base is good too because you get to activate it if you control no monsters in the main monster zone. Then the equipped monster cannot attack directly, and it can make a second attack during each battle phase, which can be kind of good if you have Shizuku that's a little bit bigger with a bunch of monsters in the graveyard, or a bunch of spells in the graveyard. And then it also has the ability that when it destroys a monster by battle, you can draw a card as well if you have 3 or more spells in the graveyard, which is really cool. And then you can target up to 3 Sky Striker spells in the graveyard if this card is sent to the graveyard and shuffle them into the deck, which is really good too because you can just instantly put those resources back into the deck, like your copy of Hornet Drones and Widow Anchor and Multi-Roll if it gets destroyed and stuff like that. We play a single copy of Afterburner. Afterburner lets you destroy a monster on the field, and then if you have 3 or more spells in the graveyard, you can destroy a spell or trap in the grave or spell or trap on the field as well. I play 2 copies of Shark Cannon. Shark Cannon lets us banish a monster in our opponent's graveyard and then special summon that monster to field instead, but it can't attack if you have 3 or more spells and traps, which can be really cool to be able to use our opponent's monsters against them with this card. So that's why I play it as a 2-of instead of a 1-of, and it's just a really good card as a 1-of, or 2-of, I mean. This card might end up being the new Widow Anchor if they do hit anything else in the deck. This card will probably go to 3 in my build because it's just that good. Then we play 3 copies of Area 0, which is the field spell. The field spell is super good. You can target 1 other card you control and excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you get to add an excavated Sky Striker card from your deck to your hand, shuffle the rest back into the deck. And if you do add an excavated Sky Striker card to your hand, you have to send the target that you had on the field to the graveyard. And also, if this card in the field zone is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, or if it's sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a Sky Striker Ace from your deck. So it gets you out your extra copies of Kangari as well, so it can really help you out there. Then we play 3 copies of Mobilize Engage, which Mobilize Engage is the big searcher of the deck. Basically, this lets you add any Sky Striker card from your deck to your hand, and then if you also have 3 spells in the grave, you can draw a card in addition to that search, which is really nuts, and that's why people are using this as a 3-of in a lot of decks as a sub-engine to Sky Strikers. I call it on the next list, this card is going to go to 1. I really feel like this card is going to go to 1 on the next list, and it's going to just destroy Sky Strikers for a little while. They're going to go to 2 or 3, tier 2 or 3 after that. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's go into the traps. So Sky Strikers have kind of turned into more of a grind deck, or they always have been kind of a grind deck. So I kind of focus more around the traps a little bit. So we're going to be playing 2 copies of Lost Wind. Lost Wind is a really good underrated card that people don't use quite as much as they should. You get to target a special summon monster on the field and negate its effects, and also its original attack is halved, which can be really beneficial to you, because if you're playing against anything and you have played Sky Strikers before, you know that Sky Strikers don't make really big monsters. Like, the biggest you usually make is like 2,000 in this deck, so this is really a good card to play as a 1-of or 2-of in the deck, because you can just reduce those other monsters on the field. And then when this card is in the graveyard, you can set it back to the field but banish it when it leaves the field, except the turn it was sent to the grave, which is really cool. If an opponent's monster special summons, or if your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck while it's in the grave, you can just put it back on the field, which is really good. Something that I play that I haven't seen a lot of other people play is 3 Compulse. Compulse just bounces something. Like, it's just a good overall trap. You could change this out for impermanence, but it's my budget option to impermanence. But I just feel like the 3 Compulse is really pivotal for me, because instead of just negating, I'm just bouncing the monster altogether and getting rid of it. Then I play 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. Solemn Judgment is also a really good trap in here because it's always live, and you always have life points. Unless you've lost the duel, you always can pay half to negate something. So I feel like this is a really good 3 of in the deck, and it's really a good control-based card in this deck. And then I play 3 copies of There Can Only Be One, because you usually are only going to have like Kangari on the field, Shizuku on the field, or Kaina on the field, or Hayate. Like, you're only ever going to have one of your extra deck Sky Strikers on the field, unless you're going to get something out like a Boral Sword, which you can get out in this deck. It's a little tough, but you can get out something like a Boral Sword by using stuff like Shark Cannon and Widow Anchor to be able to take your opponent's monster and link climb up into that. So There Can Only Be One is really good because you just don't want to deal with a bunch of monsters against this deck. You kind of want to shut that gate and close that gate a little bit. And There Can Only Be One can be really a good card. And I think it'd be really ironic, and I call it on the next list. I do think There Can Only Be One is going to go to 1 as well. So that's it for the traps, guys. Let's go into the extra deck. That's actually it for the whole main deck. So let's go into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing a single copy of Kangari, because Kangari is also at 1, and the 4th card that is at 1 in this deck. Kangari, basically, if it's Link Summon or if it's Special Summon, you get to target a Sky Striker spell or trap or spell in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. Then it gains 100 attack for each spell in the graveyard, which is really cool, and you can only Special Summon it once per turn. Then we play 3 copies of Shizuku. Shizuku is hands down my favorite over Kangari. I really like this card. Monsters that your opponent controls lose 100 attack for each spell in the graveyard, and then once per turn during the end phase, when this card is special summoned this turn, you can add a Sky Striker spell or trap or spell from your deck to your hand, which is really cool. That with a different name from the cards in your graveyard, so it has to be one that is not the same in your graveyard. Like, if you have a Mobilize Engage in the grave, you can't add Mobilize Engage from your deck to your hand, which is really cool to be able to combo off with your multi-roll, because you can just set the ones that you don't want to, that you want to search back on the field, and then resolve Shizuku, which is kind of cool too. Then we play 3 copies of Hayate. Hayate lets us attack our opponent directly, and then after damage calculation, you can send a Sky Striker card from your deck to the graveyard to get your Shizukus bigger later during the end phase, because you always usually want to end with Shizuku on your opponent's turn. Then I play 2 copies of Kaina. I don't feel like you need 2 Kaina. I feel like you could get away with probably 1 Kaina, but I feel like 2 is an option. If this card is special summon, you get to target a monster your opponent controls, and it can't attack until the end phase of your opponent's turn. And then each time you activate a Sky Striker spell or effect, you gain 100 life points immediately after this card, which is kind of irrelevant, but gaining some stuff during time kind of helps. Especially if you're only down, a couple hundred, and you put Kaina on the field, and then you gain that back. I have won games with Kaina gaining life points. It's really weird, but it was a really weird game that I did. Topologic, we play as a 1 of. This card's really interesting to put on the field. It's kind of like the big boss along with Boral Sword. These are options that you can play. You can play any Link 4 you want to in this place. I feel like Topologic and Boral Sword are the best ones. You could change it out for Boral Load and Boral Sword if you wanted to. That's another option. I like the Topologic because you can actually set a Hornet Drone, flip the Hornet Drone on your opponent's turn after they've overextended if you have Topologic on the field, and then put the drone under the bottom of the Topologic into a zone that it points to, and then destroy all their monsters on their field, and then attack them next turn with Topologic and potentially win. And just be able to reuse that Hornet Drone over and over again to put it into the zone that the Topologic is pointing to. Then I play a Nightmare Unicorn, Nightmare Phoenix, Nightmare Cerberus combo, where you just have these kind of to pop spells and traps. You pop spells and traps, pop monsters, and bounce stuff with this, so there are other options. And then I play a Blockade Borg Blocker. This is a really good, the blocker is really good because it lets you put your multi-roll back on the field, as well as, you know, your continuous spells and your field spell if you need to, which just really helps out. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this one. It's a really fun deck to play around with, and it's really interesting that this deck can grind so much. Like, this deck is known as the resource deck. Like, you have so many resources and you can just keep refreshing all your resources over and over again, and it just never runs out of steam. Like, it just seems like it never runs out of steam to me when you're playing Sky Striker. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell in there so you can become part of the notification squad, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See you around, guys.